Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with baked pumpkin polenta. That's right, we're giving a savory pumpkin twist to what I think is probably the best way to enjoy polenta, and that would be in its much more interesting, more visually appealing baked form. And you'll see why shortly. But this is just as much a magic trick as it is a recipe. And to get started, we will toss some butter into some olive oil that we've drizzled into a saucepan set over medium-high heat. And of course, whenever the butter lands like that, we have to wait for it to fall over before we move to the next shot. There we go. And what we'll do as soon as the butter melts is toss in some sage leaves, and we will briefly fry those in this hot oil and butter for just a few seconds until they turn crisp. And just as soon as they're dark green and they've stopped bubbling, they're done, which happens so fast I couldn't even show you the exact moment. But as soon as it does, we'll pull those out and we'll turn off our heat, and we'll reserve those on a paper towel lined plate, since besides flavoring our fat, we can also use those as a garnish. And by the way, those little brown specks you see in the pan are not from the sage. Those are actually caramelized milk solids from the butter, which are not only not a problem, they're actually a very good thing, since that's going to add a little bit of toasty nuttiness. And then once our sage is out, we can transfer our pumpkin in, which is going to be 1 can of pure pumpkin puree, and not, I repeat, not pumpkin pie filling. Oh yeah, you only make that mistake once. And then to our pure pumpkin, we will add some nice cold fresh water, and we can also raise our heat up to high, since we want this to come up to a boil. And while we're waiting for that to happen, we'll go ahead and season this up with some kosher salt, as well as some freshly ground black pepper. And then we can take a whisk and give everything a mix. And like I said, we'll wait for this to come to a boil. And once it does, we will grab our whisk, and we will slowly whisk in our fine cornmeal, which, by the way, I'm not very good at. I always add things too fast and too quickly, especially now that I'm getting older. But unless you really dump it in super fast, you're probably not going to have any problems with lumps. And if you do see a couple, don't worry, just keep whisking, since this will thicken up quickly, and those will disappear as you whisk. And you'll notice as soon as you add that in, it will thicken up almost instantly. So at this stage, we want to keep whisking pretty much continually. And also we'll reduce our heat to medium-low, since we have to cook this for about 20 to 25 minutes. And if our heat's too high, the bottom's going to want to stick and it could scorch. So we will lower our heat and keep whisking. But good news, we do not have to whisk the entire 20 to 25 minutes, as some overly cautious chefs will tell you. Okay, after the initial couple minutes of whisking, we can simply let this cook on medium-low, and we only have to whisk it every like 3 or 4 minutes maybe, since the only reason we're whisking it is so that it doesn't start to stick to the bottom. And if it's not doing that, you're doing good. And yes, you heard me correctly earlier. We're using fine cornmeal for this and not polenta, which is generally ground coarser. And I do like to use actual polenta when I'm doing the soft version that you spoon in the bowl. But it's a proven scientific fact that the fine cornmeal works better for the baked version. But anyway, like I said, we'll cook that for about 25 minutes, at which point it's going to have thickened up a little bit, but it's not really going to look that much different. And the way to tell if you're really done is to take a little bit on a spoon and give it a taste. And if it's ready, it should be nice and creamy and soft. But if it still feels kind of gritty, it's not done, and we'll need to let it simmer a little more until it isn't gritty. And once we determine it's cooked long enough, we will turn off the heat, and we will add our last few ingredients, including a couple shakes of cayenne, as well as a little splash of milk, plus a whole bunch of freshly grated Parmesan cheese. And of course we're going to use the real stuff, Parmigiano Reggiano. And yes, you have to grate it yourself, which even if you're really slow, is going to take you about 30 seconds. And then what we'll do is take our whisk and give this a thorough mixing until everything's beautifully and evenly combined. And then once that's been accomplished, we will transfer that into a very generously olive-oiled cake pan. And if you're keeping score at home, this is 9 by 9 inches. Oh, and when I mentioned the magic trick part earlier, what I'm referring to is that this stuff is so soft and loose when it's hot. But somehow, some way, using this technique, we're going to be able to bake squares of this that hold their shape. I know it does seem impossible, but it is very, very possible. And for that to happen, the first thing we have to do is let this cool down to room temp on the counter, at which point we'll cover this in plastic and pop it in the fridge for a minimum of 3 hours. Although I almost always do this in the evening and let it sit overnight. But anyway, 3 hours is the minimum. And once thoroughly chilled, we'll pull it out. And if everything goes according to plan, if we turn that over and maybe give it the old shake-a, it should come right out nice and clean. And yes, as you can see, because of the pan I used, this one is ribbed for your visual pleasure. But whether yours has a cool line pattern or not, what we'll do is take a knife and cut this into 8 equal rectangles. Or at least that's what I'm doing. I guess you could cut this into as many pieces as you want. And if you don't have a square cake pan and only a round one, you can just cut wedges and it will work the same. And then once we have that cut up, we will transfer our now beautifully firm polenta onto a sheet pan that we've lined with a silpat or some parchment paper. And then we can, if we want, just bake it at this point. But I do like to add a little bit of cheese on top. Right, maybe a little bit of mozzarella or provolone or fontina. Or in my case, a Monterey Jack. And besides a little more interesting appearance and a little extra flavor, I'm also doing some cheese because I'm going to top this with some fried sage. And I think that's going to make for a beautiful color contrast when we place that on top. And that's it. Once those tops have been cheesed, I'm going to add a little sprinkle of cayenne, just for a little extra touch of heat, but also to sort of warm up the color of the top. And if you don't want the extra heat, you can do the same thing with some paprika. And that's it. These are now ready to transfer into the center of a 425-degree oven for about 30 minutes, or until they're fully heated through, and they look like this. Oh yeah, those are pretty. But you know what? I think we can make them a little bit prettier if we top them with some fried sage leaves, which could be the ones we use to flavor our oil and butter. But since I was baking mine the next day, I did fry up a fresh batch, so they look extra nice. But anyway, that'll be up to you. And you can just serve these plain. I mean, you are, after all, the Lord of how to garnish your baked cornmeal with gourd. And that's it. Once I had those garnished, I went ahead and served one up, so I can grab a fork and go in for the official taste and show you what's going on. And you'll see as I try to cut this with the edge of the fork, how the inside's very soft and creamy and fluffy, but that's all surrounded by sort of a crusty skin, which is basically somehow holding everything together. Which, as I touched on earlier, really is the magic to baked polenta. That somehow we got something so soft and creamy and runny to stay in this beautifully neat geometric package. I mean, that loose corn mush we spoon into a bowl is fine, but texturally speaking, I prefer this version much more. Oh, and if you've never had fried sage before, it's actually crispy, which is why you should crumble it up and mix it into the other goodness. And as far as the taste goes, if you blindfolded a friend, with their consent of course, and you fed them some of this, I doubt they'd be able to tell you there was pumpkin in it, since it's completely savory in this application, and we did not defile it with pumpkin spice. So if you were worried about that, don't. What we're getting here is a very subtly sweet earthiness, and since it is so similar to classic polenta, we're not only able to enjoy this as a holiday side dish next to a turkey or a ham, but also in any of those classic Italian ways we'd enjoy regular polenta. Like, for example, served with a beautiful beef ragu. And if there's a better combination of saucy meat and starchy, comforting side dish, I do not know what it is. Because that, my friends, was perfect. But whether you serve this with a weeknight ragu or a special occasion holiday dinner, this baked polenta is very easy, very beautiful, and extremely delicious. Which is why I really do hope you give this a try soon. So please follow the links below for the ingredient amounts, a printable written recipe, and much more info as usual. And as always,